Travel back in time with a trip inside the Iowa's News Now vault.
About 75 law officers descended on Monona last night when it was learned 2 escaped prisoners from Wisconsin had taken a couple hostage and were holed up inside their home. The escapees were 22-year-old Mark Bell and 33-year-old Leonard Specht. Their hostages were Leslie and Laura Eady. Specht and Bell's route to Monona was a violent one. They were being pursued by a state trooper after having robbed and tied up this Wyalusing, Wisconsin couple and stealing their guns and car. The Edys had apparently been standing in their front yard when the 2 escapees ended the chase and took them hostage. That was the situation until 10 o'clock this morning. That's when Leslie Eady was released, and a short time later, Bell surrendered. But Mrs. Eady and Specht remained in the house. Authorities set a 5 p.m. deadline to resolve the issue one way or another. At about 4:30, a Wisconsin prison official entered the house. 15 minutes later, Mrs. Eady was released. And 15 minutes after that, as that 5 o'clock deadline neared, Specht came out with his hands above his head. A potentially deadly situation had ended without bloodshed. And after the ordeal had ended, authorities started explaining just what had happened.
He was very tired, for one thing. He was somewhat physically devastated. He was very ill. He was very tense, very tired. And these guys just wore him out.
They wore him out by talking continually. But if the talking had failed, a half-dozen sharpshooters from the State Patrol SWAT team had rifles trained on the house, and they were ready to use them.
There's always that possibility. It could have come up several times during this thing.
But everyone involved seemed relieved that it didn't come to that. The Edys are thought to be unharmed, while both Bell and Specht face a host of charges in Iowa and Wisconsin. Barry Butters, 2 Action News, Monona.
This whole incident started around 4:30 yesterday afternoon when 2 escaped convicts from Wisconsin were being chased by an Iowa Highway Patrol officer. They abandoned their stolen car in front of the home of Mr. and Mrs. Lester Eady. Reportedly, the couple were sitting on the porch and were ordered inside. Larry Taylor lives behind the Eady home.
I went out and asked them if I could leave, if it was possible to get out, and they said yes, it would probably evacuate the neighborhood. It'd be easier, better that way. Nobody'd be in the houses then. Well, I left. I didn't want to stick in the neighborhood if somebody's going to be shooting,
One of the gunmen is believed to be Leonard Specht, 33, of Potosi, Wisconsin. He is serving a prison sentence for conduct regardless of life. He was found guilty for another hostage incident in Cassville, Wisconsin back in June of 1979. The other gunman is 22-year-old Mark Bell of La Crosse, Wisconsin. He was serving a sentence for armed robbery. This was the scene on Chestnut Street last night as officers had the street barricaded and the lights turned off around the house. Neighbors in that whole block were evacuated. A command post was set up. Through the night, officers have waited and talked with gunmen by phone. Parents of Mark Bell were brought down from La Crosse to talk to their son. The 2 convicts had wanted a helicopter in exchange for the hostages. No word on what they would use it for. The 2 escaped from Oregon State Camp near Madison about a week ago. They had held hostages also Sunday afternoon at Wyalusing in Wisconsin, where they stole a car and some guns. Mr. and Mrs. Lester Eady recently moved to Monona, where they are in their 40s and believed to be unemployed. State trooper SWAT teams and law enforcement officers have been on the scene last night and all day. Just before 9 a.m., officers could be seen milling around. Just before 10, gunman Mark Bell surrendered. It was about an hour later when Lester Eady was released, leaving Specht and Mrs. Eady still inside the house. Roger Riley, 2 Action News, Monona.
There's been a lot of waiting in the town of Monona this afternoon. Mrs. Eady is being held hostage in her home, which is just about a block and a half right up that street, right beyond the police cars. You see all the police cars lined up. They're lined up in most of the streets leading toward the Eady home this afternoon. And most of the intersections within sight of the home, people have gathered, as you see here behind me, waiting and waiting and waiting. How long have you been out here?
Oh, off and on.
I see.
Get tired of waiting, you go home.
What do you think will happen? Are you concerned about this, or what's your feeling?
Oh, yeah, I hope she gets out okay,
Oh, they're all excited, I guess, about it.
Mm-hmm. Are they concerned, or do they feel it'll turn out well, or?
Well, they hope it turns out the right way.
What's Mrs. Eady like? Is she a calm person, or is she excitable, or what?
Not really. She's just a nice person, really. Just don't bother nobody. They're good people.
Certainly what happened in Monona last night and today was dramatic and life-threatening, but the people reacted in a calm and sensible way. As one man told me, it may be today or tomorrow or the next day, but life will quickly return to normal once this is over. We'll have a full report on this incident from the background to the happy ending tonight at 10.
And the two guys, they jumped around the corner the other direction. He says, don't move or we'll blast you.
Donald calls Specht the mean guy and Bell the little guy. He says they'd been hiding in his home for a couple of days, and when the Longs returned from their weekend trip, the convicts wasted no time.
The little guy went out in the garage and found some rope to tie us up with. Otherwise, they were going to put us in the trunk and take us with them.
The convicts put a gun at Madonna's back and forced the Longs upstairs to the attic. Donald was bound and told to lie on this mattress. Madonna was led to the other side of the attic.
And they made me go over on the other side of the attic and sit on a pasteboard box and put a rope around my neck and put it around a rafter and then tied my hands real tight and tied that up to the rafter.
When Bell and Specht left in Long's car, Donald managed to wiggle free and run outside for help. But the Longs remained concerned for the couple held hostage in Monona.
Yes, I hope nothing happens because it's our guns I have. So,
yeah.
I hope nothing happens.
Yeah.
And we're lucky.
Mm-hmm.